Your mother is a maid. Let her eat in the kitchen with the dog. My husband spat out, shoving my elderly mom away from the table in front of all our family. My mother-in-law, Margaret, nodded in approval. I silently rose, took my mother's hand, and walked toward my husband. What I did in the next second was something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Elena Hayes stood by the panoramic window in the living room, watching the last rays of the October sun gild the tops of the pine trees. At 35, she seemed to have everything anyone could wish for. A spacious house in a high-end, gated community outside of Dallas, Texas, a husband, Victor Sterling, whom everyone considered successful, and a stable job at a major corporate firm. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and expensive perfume, the scent of comfort and prosperity that she had worked so hard to create over the last 10 years. Welcome to Betty's Stories. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and like my video. Now let's jump back into my story. I'm sure you'll love it if you keep listening till the end. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the surface of this perfect picture, a quiet, nagging anxiety had long settled, like a sliver you couldn't pull out. Today, that anxiety felt particularly sharp. In 3 days, Victor would turn 38, and he had decided to celebrate the event extravagantly. Not just dinner out, but a huge reception right in their home. The guest list, which he had compiled with his mother, Margaret Sterling, looked more like a registry of the local business elite. It included partners from his logistics firm, a couple of city councilmen, and friends from the highest social circles, and, of course, his mother, the widow of a prestigious university dean, a woman who valued social status above everything else in the world. Alana, did you double-check that the catering service got the order right? Victor's voice, sounding from behind her, yanked her out of her thoughts. I need the canapes with genuine black caviar and a specific vintage of Brut, no compromises. He approached and wrapped his arms around her shoulders, burying his nose in her hair. He smelled of expensive cologne and the confidence of a man accustomed to getting the best. Yes, sweetie. I checked everything, she answered softly. Everything will be top tier, just the way you like it. That's why I value you, he said, kissing the top of her head. You know how to create the right atmosphere. This is going to be an important event. Everything has to be flawless. Alana nodded, but the smile felt forced. The right atmosphere. Lately, that phrase came up constantly. The right people, the right drinks, the right topics of conversation. And into this right world, she was supposed to bring her parents. I was just thinking. She began cautiously, turning to face him. My parents are driving in Saturday morning. I wanted them to be at the party, too. Victor frowned. His handsome, well-groomed face momentarily lost its amiable expression. He walked over to the fireplace and ran his hand along the marble mantel. Alana, we discussed this. My partners are serious people. Your parents are wonderful people. I respect them, but he stumbled, searching for the right words. They're just too simple for this kind of event. They'd feel awkward. There it was, the sliver, too simple. Her father, Arthur Hayes, had worked in construction his whole life, and her mother, Lydia Hayes, was a former registered nurse. They were the people who raised her, paid for her education, and always supported her. The people whose callous hands and kind, slightly weary eyes were dearer to her than anything else on earth. They are my parents, Alana said, quietly but firmly. And this is my house, too. I want them to share this celebration with us. Victor sighed, heavily, feigning exhaustion. Fine, whatever you say. Just please ask them not to start talking about the garden or their endless canning projects. And tell your mother not to try and help in the kitchen. We'll have service staff for that. He said it in a casual tone, as if giving instructions to his assistant. But for Alana, the words felt like a slap. He wasn't just embarrassed by her parents. He despised them. This wasn't Just another warning sign. It was a deafening alarm that for some reason she kept ignoring. She remained silent, swallowing the insult once again. But deep in her soul, something finally snapped. She didn't know yet that this birthday celebration would become not just a party, but a point of no return, after which her life would never be the same. The next day, Alana was beside herself. Her husband's words about the service staff and her simple parents ran through her mind, leaving a bitter taste. She tried to convince herself that Victor hadn't meant to hurt her, that he was simply worried about his reputation and the event's success. After all, his firm, Trans Global Logistics, had been taking off recently, and he was so proud of his CEO status. But the more she thought about it, the clearer she saw the truth. It wasn't about reputation. It was about a deep-seated snobbery that she had previously tried not to notice. That evening, as they discussed the final details of the party, the topic of her parents resurfaced. "All right, let's decide where we're going to seat them," Victor said, tracing his finger over the seating chart he'd sketched out. "Maybe at that small table by the sunroom. It'll be quieter there. They'll be more comfortable." Alana looked at the chart. The small table by the sunroom was in the furthest corner of the enormous living room, practically isolated from the central table where Victor, his mother, and the most important guests were to sit. "You want to seat my parents in a corner, out of the way." Her voice trembled. "Alana, don't start." He winced. "I'm doing this with the best intentions. They'll feel awkward listening to talk about the stock market and politics out there. They can chat quietly about their own things. Things they understand. Their own things. Things they understand. Cucumbers, tomatoes, seedlings." Alana felt a lump rise in her throat. For 10 years she had lived with this man, loved him, created a comfortable home for him, and supported all his ventures. And all this time he had viewed her family as second-rate. Just then, Victor's phone rang. His mother's name flashed on the screen. He instantly changed his expression, putting on his most charming smile. "Yes. Mommy." "Hi." "Yes, everything's on schedule. Alana is helping me with the seating chart right now." He put the call on speaker, which he always did when the conversation involved something he felt Alana needed to learn. "Vic, I'm calling about an important matter." Margaret Sterling's authoritative, well-modulated voice boomed from the speaker. "I spoke with Ella Lehner Jenkins, the city councilman's wife. They are coming. I insist they be seated next to us. Those are very important connections. And also, I hope you've sorted out the matter of Alana's relatives." Alana froze, her fingernails digging into her palms. "Yes, Mom. Don't worry," Victor hastily assured her. "We're seating them at a separate cozy table. They'll be very comfortable there." "That's wonderful," Margaret said with relief. "Because, people can be so different. We wouldn't want the evening spoiled by some inappropriate stories about country life. It could damage your reputation, son. You're at a level now where every detail matters." Victor gave Alana a quick glance, a mix of guilt and a plea for understanding, but Alana didn't want to understand anything anymore. She silently got up and walked out onto the terrace to gulp down the cold evening air. The humiliation was so profound she felt she could almost touch it. Her husband and mother-in-law were discussing her parents as if they were inconvenient pieces of furniture that needed to be stashed away so as not to spoil the decor. She stood hugging herself and remembered how it all began. When she met Victor, he was just an ordinary manager in a small company, ambitious, but without much prospect. It was her father, Arthur Hayes, who saw potential in him and decided to help. He set up a separate firm for Victor, poured huge amounts of money into it, and made him CEO so his son-in-law would feel secure and could provide for his daughter. And now, this successful businessman, whose position was entirely owed to her simple father, was ashamed of his benefactors. When she returned to the room, Victor had finished the conversation. He approached her with a contrite look. Alana, don't be upset with Mom. She's old school. All those formalities are very important to her. She's just worried about me. And you think I'm not worried? She asked quietly. Worried that my parents, the most precious people to me, are about to be humiliated in my own home. No one is going to humiliate them, he flared up. We just want everyone to be comfortable. Why do you always take everything so personally? He spun around and marched into his office, slamming the door. Alana was left alone, in the middle of the living room where the tables were already arranged for the upcoming party. And for the first time in years, she felt like a stranger in this big, beautiful, yet cold house. The tension was mounting, and she knew that the upcoming birthday party would be a test not only for her nerves, but for their entire marriage. The next day, Alana threw herself into work, trying to distract herself from her gloomy thoughts. She was the lead marketer at her father's main company, although she and her family had agreed not to publicize this fact. To Victor and his circle, she was simply a hired specialist at some construction firm. This small lie, originally devised by her father not to hurt his son-in-law's ego, now seemed ugly and humiliating. She was working on a large, new project, and the numbers, reports, and charts temporarily pushed the family problems out of her mind. But that evening, as she was packing up to go home, the phone rang. Her mother's number flashed on the screen. Alana smiled. Talking to her mom was always a welcome relief. Hi, Mom, she said cheerfully into the receiver. Hello, honey. Lydia Hayes's voice was quiet and somewhat hesitant.
Am I
interrupting? No, not at all. I'm just finishing up. How are you and Dad?
We're fine.
Your dad is tinkering in the garage. I'm calling about something else. Don't laugh.
Okay.
Alana tensed up. That phrase always preceded a request or a problem that made her mom feel awkward. Of course, I won't.
What is it?
Well, we're coming for Victor's birthday on Saturday. Lydia hesitated. And I was wondering what to wear. I don't have anything really formal. The dress I wore to my third cousin's wedding is old, and the style is all wrong, and you'll have important guests there. Alana's heart squeezed with tenderness and pain. Her mom, a simple, genuine woman, wasn't worried about how she would be received, but about not embarrassing her daughter, not looking like a fish out of water among Victor's stylish and polished guests. Mom, what are you worrying about? She tried to sound as upbeat as possible. Wear whatever you're comfortable in. You're the prettiest woman in any outfit. The main thing is that you and Dad are there. Yes, I know, honey, Lydia sighed. But I don't want to embarrass
you.
I see the pictures. Your friends are so elegant. And me, a plain dress.
Flats.
Maybe I shouldn't come at all. Maybe your father and I can just stop by another day to wish him a happy birthday. That question hit Alana hard. Her mother, her closest person, was ready to skip the celebration just so she wouldn't inconvenience her daughter or put her in an awkward position in front of her husband and his high-status relatives. This was the final straw. The hidden tension that had been building for days burst to the surface. Mom, she said firmly, still entering her voice, don't even think about it. You and Dad will be the guests of honor at that party. And you know what? Tomorrow after work, we're going shopping and buying you the most beautiful dress we can find in shoes and a purse. Oh, honey, you don't have to, her mom protested. That's a lot of money. No arguments, Alana cut her off. Consider it my gift. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Hanging up the phone, Alana sat motionless for several minutes, staring into the dark office window. The decision came to her on its own. Enough. Enough with the compromises. Enough with apologizing for her family. Enough with pretending everything was fine. If her husband and his mother were so obsessed with appearances, she would give them exactly what they wanted. She would dress her mother so impeccably that none of the powdered socialites could accuse her of lacking taste. That phone call was the trigger. It finally shattered the last of her illusions about Victor, a man who forced her mother to feel ashamed and unwelcome, did not deserve her understanding or forgiveness. The conflict was no longer hidden. It had taken clear shape. This was a war.
A war.
For her family's dignity. And in this war, Alana was ready to go. All the way. She gathered her things and left the office with her head held high. Inside her, there was no more fear or uncertainty, only a cold, resonant resolve. Tomorrow's shopping trip was not just about buying a dress. It was her first shot in this undeclared war. The next day, promptly at 6 o'clock in the evening, Alana parked her car in front of the modest, older townhome where her
Parents lived.
She had deliberately not told Victor about her plans, saying she was staying late at the office for an urgent meeting. Lydia Hayes was already waiting for her by the entrance, wearing her best coat, looking both excited and embarrassed. Maybe we shouldn't, Alana. She started again, getting into the car. What am I going to do walking around boutiques at my age? Mom, we're going. Alana smiled, pulling away. You're about to have a shopping therapy session. They drove to the largest and most upscale mall in the city. Alana confidently led her mother past the display windows, which made Lydia's eyes widen. She had never been to places like this, and felt as if she had stepped into another world. Honey, the prices here are probably what I make in a year, she whispered, clutching Alana's arm. We are not thinking about prices today, Alana stated. She led her mother into an elegant evening wear salon. The consultants, recognizing Alana's expensive suit, immediately surrounded them with attention. Alana selected several designs and sent her mother into the fitting room. When Lydia emerged in the first dress, a rich sapphire blue, made of flowing silk, elegantly cut and tailored, Alana gasped. The dress fit perfectly, accentuating her still slender figure and harmonizing beautifully with the silver in her hair and her kind blue eyes. Mom, you're a queen. Alana breathed out. Lydia looked at her reflection with disbelief. She had never seen herself like this. All her life she had worn practical, simple clothes, and suddenly this chic, restrained luxury. To match the dress, they found delicate heels with a low, sturdy base, a small velvet clutch, and a single strand of natural pearls. When the transformation was complete, Lydia Hayes looked like an aristocrat accidentally lost in the hustle of the modern world. Thank you, honey, she whispered, tears in her eyes. I never even dreamed of something like this. You deserve it, Alana said, giving her a fierce hug. They got home late that evening. Arthur Hayes, seeing his wife, whistled in admiration. Lydia, you look like a movie star. Lydia laughed happily, twirling around the room in her new dress. Alana watched her parents and her heart filled with warmth. For these moments, she was ready to do anything. On Saturday morning, the Hayes family arrived. Arthur Hayes was in a new well-fitting suit that Alana had also managed to buy for him the day before, and Lydia looked absolutely stunning. When they walked into the house, Victor, who met them in the foyer, was momentarily speechless. He had expected to see a modest elderly couple in worn clothes, but standing before him were elegant, dignified people. Hello, he mumbled, regaining his composure. Come in, make yourselves at home. Margaret Sterling was the first to come downstairs. She surveyed Alana's parents from head to toe with an appraising eye. A flash of surprise mixed with disappointment crossed her gaze. She had clearly prepared for a different spectacle and had a reserve of venomous comments ready, but the Hayes appearance gave her no grounds for them. Good afternoon, she drawled coolly, barely
Nodding.
I'm glad you could make it. Guests began arriving after 6 o'clock. The house filled with the buzz of voices, the clinking of glasses, and soft music. Alana's parents were a bit reserved, but held themselves with great dignity. Arthur found common ground with one of Victor's business partners who also turned out to come from a working-class background and listen with interest to his stories about construction.
Lydia.
Chatted pleasantly with another guest's wife, discussing their grandchildren. Alana watched them with pride and relief. It seemed her worst fears were unfounded, but she had underestimated. Margaret Sterling. At the banquet table, the mother-in-law sat at the head next to her son. Alana's parents were seated opposite. Lydia, what an interesting dress you have. Margaret began in a voice as sweet as honey, drawing everyone's attention. Such a deep color. It must be a local designer.
We
Have some very talented young designers popping up in the city. Lydia blushed. Oh, no, it's not. Alana bought it for me at the mall. Ah, at the M? The mother-in-law prolonged. A faint trace of condescension in her tone. I see. Even there you can find decent knockoffs of famous brands nowadays. The main thing is that the fabric is good. You know, synthetics cheapen even the most exquisite look. A few guests giggled. Alana felt the blood rush to her face. This was a direct insult veiled as polite chatter. Margaret, she interjected, trying to speak calmly. The dress is natural silk from a well-known Italian brand, and it's not a knockoff. It's the original. The mother-in-law raised her eyebrows in feigned surprise. Is that so, dear?
I
Didn't realize that retired nurses could afford such outfits. It must have been quite expensive. She emphasized the word nurses, reminding everyone of Lydia's humble background. Arthur Hayes, who had been silent until then, placed his wide working hand on his wife's. My wife can afford anything she wants, he said quietly, but with such weight that everyone at the table fell silent, because she has a daughter who loves her and a husband who worked his whole life to ensure his family never went without anything. Margaret pursed her lips, realizing she had been rebuffed. The conflict had entered an open phase. Alana saw Victor sitting there, red as a lobster, but remaining silent, not daring to contradict his mother. And in that moment, she realized her husband had already made his choice, and that choice was not in her favor. The party continued, but the atmosphere at the table grew tense. The guests, sensing a brewing storm, tried to talk about neutral subjects, but the awkwardness lingered in the air. Margaret went quiet, but her contemptuous glances at Alana's parents spoke volumes. Alana sat on pins and needles, awaiting the next
attack.
It was in this moment that her phone, resting on her lap beneath her napkin, vibrated. She discreetly glanced at the screen.
It
was Sidney Thomas, her father's right-hand man and the de facto manager of their family business. A call on a Saturday night could only mean one thing. Something serious had happened. She excused herself and walked out to the foyer, trying to leave without drawing attention. Yes, Sidney, I'm listening. Alana, I'm sorry to bother you on the
weekend.
His voice on the line was anxious. We have an emergency. Remember the shipment of German parts for Transglobal that was supposed to arrive Monday? Of course, I remember. Alana's blood ran cold. Victor said it was a key shipment for his new contract. Well, it's not
Coming.
Customs won't release it. Why not? What happened? Our supplier in Germany messed up the paperwork. They're missing some kind of compliance certificate. The cargo is stuck at the border. If we don't resolve the problem within 48 hours, it'll be shipped back. Alana leaned against the wall. This was a disaster. Victor's firm, Transglobal Logistics, was entirely dependent on the supplies organized by her father's company. This contract with a major auto plant was Victor's project of the year. Its failure meant not only enormous financial losses, but also a blow to the reputation he cherished so deeply. What can be done? She asked, trying to keep her composure. I've already contacted the Germans. They're searching for the documents, but it might take time. There is another option. We have similar parts at our warehouse in Atlanta, but from a different manufacturer. We could quickly organize a truck delivery. It would arrive by Monday morning. But what? But Victor would have to agree. to the substitution. The manufacturer is different even if the quality is just as good. And you know how particular he is about these things. He demands strict adherence to specs.
I'll talk to him. We need to decide now.
The truck has to leave within the hour or we won't make it. Alana looked toward the living room, where the sound of laughter and clinking glasses drifted. Victor was the center of attention right now. He was giving a toast, bragging about his successes. Pulling him out now, trying to explain a complex technical problem and asking him to make a critical decision was impossible. He would either fail to understand or throw a fit about being distracted from his party over minor details. Sydney, she made a decision. Send the truck. I'll take full responsibility. Process the documents as an emergency substitution under my order. I'll handle Victor myself. Are you sure, Alana?
If
he refuses the shipment, he will accept it, she said firmly. He won't have a
choice.
Hanging up, she stood in the silence of the foyer for several minutes, trying to calm her frantically pounding heart. The irony of fate. While her husband was showing off his successful business to guests, she, the daughter of simple parents, was secretly saving that very business from collapse. She was torn between maintaining face at this fake party and solving a real serious problem. She returned to the table, trying not to show her anxiety. Victor was just finishing his toast. I want to thank everyone who believed in me, my partners, my friends, and of course my mother, who has always been my pillar of support. He raised his glass, pointedly, avoiding looking at Alana or her parents. Alana silently raised her glass. A cold fury grew inside her. He was thanking everyone but the people who had actually built his success from the ground up. He lived in their house, drove a car bought with her father's money, ran a firm created for him, and yet felt entitled to humiliate her family. She looked at her father. Arthur Hayes sat with an unreadable expression, but she knew he understood everything. He saw his son-in-law's arrogance, his wife's pain, and her own despair. But he remained silent, leaving it up to his daughter to decide what to do. He had always taught her to be strong. The situation grew more complicated by the minute. Pressure from her husband and mother-in-law, the humiliation of her parents, and now this supply crisis. Alana felt her patience was at its limit. She sat at a luxurious table in her beautiful home, surrounded by high-status guests, and felt like the loneliest, most miserable woman in the world. She knew an explosion was inevitable. The only question was who would light the fuse. The evening rolled on. Guests gave routine toasts, praising Victor's talents and business acumen. He accepted the compliments with the air of a Caesar receiving gifts from conquered peoples. Margaret Sterling beamed, savoring her son's triumph. Alana's parents sat quietly, trying to be inconspicuous. Lydia barely touched her food, only occasionally taking a sip of sparkling water. Alana felt the tension in her reaching a critical point. Every boastful word from her husband echoed painfully inside her. She looked at him and didn't recognize him. Where was the man she had fallen in love with 10 years ago? The one who had promised to be her rock and protector. In his place sat a smug, pompous peacock who valued the opinion of strangers more than his own wife's feelings. The climax arrived unexpectedly over a trifle. A server hired by the catering service was offering dessert. When he approached Lydia Hayes, she fumbled trying to take a pastry, accidentally knocking over her glass of cranberry punch. The bright red liquid spilled onto the white tablecloth, leaving an ugly stain right in front of her plate. "Oh, please forgive me," Lydia stammered, blushing furiously. She grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe up the puddle, but only smeared the stain more. In the ensuing silence, all eyes turned to her. Margaret Sterling twisted her lips into a look of disgust. Victor, who had been laughing merrily at someone's joke, abruptly fell silent. His face turned to stone. He slowly stood up, pushing his chair back. The look he cast upon his mother-in-law was full of icy contempt. "Mom," he said loudly and clearly, making sure everyone heard. His voice rang with poorly concealed irritation. "Now, why were you so careless? It's like you're not even in your own home." Lydia shrank under his gaze, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. "I didn't mean to, Vic, dear." But Victor wasn't listening. He surveyed the pale guests, inviting them to witness his magnanimity, and simultaneously his righteous anger. "No harm done," he continued with a false smile. "The tablecloth can be thrown out, but perhaps to avoid any further incidents, you would be more comfortable finishing your dinner somewhere else." He paused, enjoying the effect. The guests froze, not understanding what was happening. Alana felt her breath catch. "The servants' place is in the kitchen," Victor enunciated, every word whipping like a lash. "You can eat there. Our dog is having his dinner there right now, so you won't be lonely. You can watch to make sure he doesn't steal anything from the table." He took Lydia by the elbow and gently but insistently tugged her away from the table. "Come, I'll show you the way." In that moment, the world ceased to exist for Alana. All that remained was that humiliating gesture, those monstrous, unthinkable words spoken about her mother. She saw a tear roll down Lydia. Hayes's cheek, saw her father, Arthur, clench his fists until his knuckles turned white, yet remain motionless, letting his daughter decide what to do. Victor was already leading a stunned, shamefaced Lydia away from the table. Margaret Sterling nodded approvingly. Her face was etched with frank triumph. She had won. She had proven to everyone who was boss in this house, and who was merely a random inappropriate guest. The guest sat in deathly silence, appalled by the scene of public humiliation. Some looked away, others stared with open curiosity. It was in this very second that Alana realized she would not be silent anymore. Enough. The limit of her patience had been crossed. All bridges were burned. She silently, without a single word, stood up from her seat. Her movements were slow and deliberate. She pushed back her chair, adjusted her dress, and without looking at anyone, followed her husband and mother. She caught up with them halfway to the kitchen. "Victor, stop," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it held such a chill that Victor involuntarily paused and turned around. "What now?" he snapped impatiently. "I'm solving the problem your relatives created." "You're not solving a problem," Alana replied just as quietly. "You created one." She gently took her mother's hand, freeing her from Victor's grip. "Mommy, come with me." She led her mother back to the table, but not to their previous seats. She led her straight back to Victor's place. She stood right next to her husband. There was no love, no fear, and no hurt left in her eyes. Only emptiness and steel. What she did in the next second was something they would all remember for the rest of their lives. Alana didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood before her husband, holding her trembling mother's hand, and looked at him. She looked for a long time, studying him as if seeing him for the first time. And in that gaze was such contempt and cold fury that Victor instinctively stepped back. "Sit," she told him. It wasn't a question or a request. It was an order. He obeyed, dropping into his chair at the head of the table, not understanding why. Alana seated her mother back at her place, and remained standing behind her husband. She surveyed the frozen guests, lingered on Margaret Sterling's ashen face, and looked back at Victor. "You called my mother a maid," she said in that same icy, lifeless voice. "You decided you had the right to humiliate her in front of all these people. You decided you were the man in charge here." She paused, letting the words sink into the deafening silence. "Well, Vic, you were wrong. You are no one here." She placed her hands on his shoulders. Her touch was light, almost weightless, but Victor flinched as if she had touched him with a hot iron. "And now," she continued, her voice beginning to gain strength, I'm going to tell everyone present who you really are. But before she could say anything more, Lydia Hayes began to cry softly, not hysterically, but the way elderly people cry silently, bitterly, shaking her entire body. This quiet weeping was more terrifying than any scream.
It was the
Essence of all the humiliation she had been forced to endure. Let's go. Honey, she whispered, tugging at Alana's sleeve. Please no. Let's just go home. And in that moment, Alana broke. Hatred, anger, resolve, all of it was washed away by a wave of sharp, unbearable pity for her mother.
She
Looked at her hunched back, her gray hair, the handkerchief clutched in her wrinkled hands, and understood that no triumph, no exposure would restore her mother's peace of mind. The party was irrevocably ruined. Her mother had been humiliated, and it had happened in her
house.
Yes, Mommy, she said, her voice cracking. Of course, let's go. She no longer looked at Victor or the guests. She took her mother's arm, walked over to her father, and quietly said, Dad, we're leaving. Arthur Hayes stood up without a word. He gave his son-in-law one single look, heavy, scornful, full of silent threat. Then he walked up to his wife, put his arm around her shoulders, and led her to the exit. Alana followed them, as if in a fog.
She
Heard one of the guests awkwardly cough. Heard Margaret Sterling hiss something at her son, but all of it was far away, in another reality. Her reality was now centered on her mother's trembling back. They stepped out of the house. The cold October wind hit her face, bringing her slightly back to her senses. Alana helped her parents into their old car. Are you coming with us? Her father asked. No, she shook her head.
I'm staying.
I have one thing left to finish. She kissed her mother's tear-wet cheek.
I'm sorry, Mum. I'm sorry, Elette.
This happened. You're not to blame, honey. Lydia whispered. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. It was terrible. When her parents' car disappeared around the bend, Alana went back inside the house. The guests, taking advantage of the turmoil, had already begun to leave. They said goodbye to Victor and his mother, trying not to look at Alana as if she were the source of some contagious disease. 15 minutes later, the house was empty. Only the three of them remained: Victor, Margaret Sterling, and her. They stood in the middle of the huge living room, surrounded by dirty dishes and unfinished glasses of wine. The party was over before it had even begun. Victor approached her. His face was contorted with malice. You ruined everything, he hissed. You created a scene. You embarrassed me in front of my partners. I did, she countered, a bitter laugh escaping her. You humiliated my mother. You chased her from the table like a dog. She only has herself to
blame.
Margaret shrieked. She acted like some country bumpkin. People like that don't belong in polite society. Alana looked at them, at her husband and his mother, and felt only a resonant emptiness inside. The love that she thought lived in her heart was dead. It died the moment Victor uttered those terrible words. She felt hollowed out, scorched to the core. All these years she had been building a family, a home, a relationship, and it had all collapsed in a single evening, crumbled to dust. She silently turned and went upstairs to her bedroom. She locked the door, sat down on the bed, and only then let the tears flow. She cried not from hurt, but from disappointment, from the crushing of all her hopes, from the realization that 10 years of her life had been spent on a man who never valued or respected her. The emotional breakdown was complete, but through the despair, a thin, barely noticeable sprout of another feeling was already pushing through. A sense of cold, merciless justice. They would pay for every single
Tear her mother shed.
They would pay in full. Alana didn't know how long she sat, locked in the bedroom, shutting out the world. Her tears dried, leaving salty tracks on her cheeks. Emptiness gave way to a strange, cold calm. She no longer felt pain, only a resonant silence in her soul and absolute clarity in her mind. It was as if she were looking at her life from the outside, seeing everything in its true light without rose-colored glasses or compromises. She remembered everything. 10 years of minor humiliations she had chalked up to her mother-in-law's difficult personality. 10 years of condescending jokes from her husband about her simple parents that she had ignored to avoid causing a scene. She remembered celebrating his successes, never questioning the cost to her family. She had lived in an illusion, and today that illusion had been destroyed in the cruelest way possible. A soft knock came at the door. "Alana, open up." Victor's voice sounded muffled. "Let's talk." She remained silent. There was nothing to talk about. All the words had been spoken downstairs at the banquet table. "Alana, don't be a child. Your mother was oversensitive, and I was impulsive. It happens. We're family. We need to forgive each other. Your mother was oversensitive. Not I acted like a complete jerk, but your mother is to blame." Even now, he couldn't admit his guilt. He shifted the responsibility onto the victim. It was in this moment that something clicked in Alana's head. The pain and despair finally transformed into a cold, calculating fury. She realized she was dealing not just with a selfish and spoiled man, but with an enemy who lived under the same roof, slept in the same bed, and cynically exploited her love and her family's kindness. And she had to deal with him like an enemy without mercy or leniency. She stood, walked to the mirror, and looked at her reflection. A stranger stared back at her, a woman with a firm, resolute gaze and tightly compressed lips. No more tears, no more weakness. She opened the door. Victor stood in the hallway with a bewildered yet angry face. "Finally," he grumbled. "I thought I was going to have to break the door down." "You won't have to," she replied calmly. "I have something to tell you." They went downstairs. The living room was in chaos. Margaret Sterling was sitting in an armchair with a glass of brandy. Her face expressed extreme displeasure. "Well, is the tantrum over?" she asked, sarcastically. "I hope you're going to apologize to Victor for ruining his birthday." "No," Alana replied just as calmly. "You two are the ones who will be apologizing." She walked over to the phone and dialed a number. "Dad, hi, it's me. I have a request." Arthur Hayes was always more than a father to her. He was an ally, a brick wall, a man who spoke little but acted decisively. He listened to her without interrupting. "Are you sure, honey?" he asked when she was finished. "Absolutely," she said firmly. "Good. We'll be done." She hung up and turned to the frozen Victor and his mother. Their eyes showed bewilderment. They didn't understand what was happening. "What was that?" Victor asked. "What are you plotting?" "Nothing special," Alana shrugged. "Just deciding to put my life and yours in order." She sat down in a chair opposite her mother-in-law. "Margaret, you've always been so proud of your background, your sophistication. You considered my parents to be second-rate. You thought that money and status gave you the right to humiliate others. Well, you were deeply mistaken." At this moment, the strength she had inherited from her father emerged in her voice. The strength of a person who knows her worth and won't let anyone trample her dignity. "And you, Vic," she shifted her gaze to her husband. "You were so proud of your business, your position. You thought you were successful and independent. You thought all of this was your achievement." She smirked, and the smirk was more frightening than any shout. "Today, both of you are going to find out what your success and your sophistication are really worth." Victor and Margaret exchanged fearful glances. They realized that Alana was no longer the docile, gentle woman they were used to manipulating. Sitting before them was a different person, a person ready for war. The internal breaking point was complete. A warrior was born, and that warrior was ready to fight for herself and her family until the bitter end. Alana had achieved a cold resolve and clarity of purpose. Now she knew what she had to do, and she would do it. The realization that she needed to act came instantly. But Alana built the counterattack plan slowly and methodically, like a game of chess. She understood that emotions were a poor advisor. To win this war, she needed not tears and reproaches, but facts and evidence. She needed to rip the masks of prosperity off her husband and mother-in-law and show everyone their true ugly faces. The next morning, Alana started her day not with coffee, but with a trip to the office. On Sunday, she told a bewildered Victor that she needed to prepare an urgent report. But her real destination was her father's private office. That was where the key to her and Victor's successful life was hidden. Arthur Hayes was waiting for her. He silently opened his massive safe and took out a thick leather folder labeled Transglobal. "It's all here," he said simply, placing the folder on the desk. From day one, Alana opened the folder. Inside were neatly filed documents concerning her husband's firm. The founding agreement, which showed that 99.9% of the company's shares belonged to an offshore firm whose sole owner was Arthur Hayes. Her husband Victor Sterling owned only 1%, which gave him the right to be called a co-founder, but no real power whatsoever. Next were the bank statements. All the initial investments, all subsequent infusions for business development, for buying trucks, for warehouse leasing. All of it was her father's money. Millions of dollars transferred from the accounts of his main company. Victor hadn't invested a single penny in the business. She kept turning pages. The deed of sale for their suburban house. Buyer Arthur Hayes. The lease agreement for the same house concluded between her father and her Alana for a symbolic sum of $10 a month. Victor wasn't even listed on the agreement. Legally, he lived in that house under sufferance as his wife's guest. The title to his shiny black SUV. Owner, Transglobal. Logistics. The car was company property. Alana methodically photographed every document with her phone. Each photo was like a bullet loaded into a chamber. This was her weapon. "Dad, why did you do all this?" she asked, not looking up from the documents. "Why did you create this illusion of success for him?" Arthur Hayes sighed heavily. "I wanted my daughter to be happy. When you met him, you glowed. He was ambitious but empty. No backbone, no capital. I thought if I gave him a start, he would grab it, develop, and become a real man. I wanted him to be worthy of you, for you to be proud of him." "And I was proud," Alana said with a bitter laugh. "Proud of an empty suit." "I was wrong, honey," her father said quietly. "I created a warm bath for him, and he got used to it, and decided it would last forever. He forgot who was filling the tub with water. It's time to remind him." Returning home, Alana began the second part of her investigation. She sat down at the computer and searched for information about Margaret Sterling. She knew her mother-in-law had sold her professor's apartment in the city center several years ago, supposedly to help her son with his business. Alana had always believed this touching story of maternal sacrifice. Using open real estate databases, she quickly found information about the transaction. The apartment had indeed been sold, but in the same month, Margaret Sterling had become the owner of another property, a small but cozy one-bedroom apartment in a new prestigious high-rise, and the cost of this new apartment was virtually equal to the sum she had made from selling the old one. There was no sacrifice. It was a clever maneuver. The mother-in-law had simply upgraded her living situation, but presented it to her son and daughter-in-law as an act of self-denial. Moreover, she wasn't living in the new apartment. She was renting it out, receiving a stable monthly income that, of course, no one knew about. She continued to live with them, enjoying all the comforts of their home while complaining about being short on cash. Alana screenshotted all the documents. The picture was growing increasingly ugly. This wasn't just a family of snobs. It was a family of professional manipulators and liars who had been leading her on for years. The final touch in her investigation was a call to an old family friend who worked at a bank. She asked him to unofficially Check Victor's credit history. The answer came back an hour later and completely shocked her. Over the past 2 years, Victor had taken out 3 major personal loans from different banks, totaling almost $150,000. The money had been taken without her knowledge and was clearly not spent on family needs. Where did it go? Expensive. Watches, fishing trips with friends, maintaining the image of a successful businessman, and he was likely paying off these loans using the money allocated to TransGlobal for corporate expenses. Again, her father's money. Now, Alana had the full set. Financial fraud, lies about real estate, hidden debts. She organized all the collected materials into a separate folder on her laptop, simply titling it Judgment Day. She understood that a simple conversation would not be enough. She didn't just need to present them with the facts. She needed to do it in such a way that they could never recover from the blow. The exposure had to be public and devastating, and she already knew when and how it would happen. All week, Alana acted as if nothing were wrong. She was pointedly polite to Victor, discussed work matters with him, and asked his opinion about the dinner menu. Seeing her composure, he relaxed, convinced that his wife had gotten over her anger and had accepted the situation. He even tried several times to bring up the incident with her mother, suggesting it was an unfortunate misunderstanding and they needed to forget about it to save their marriage. Margaret Sterling also changed tactics. She stopped making Barb comments and began playing the role of the caring mother-in-law. She called Alana, asked about her health, and gave household advice. Both of them thought the storm had passed. They didn't know it was merely the calm before the true hurricane. On Friday morning, while Victor was at work, Alana delivered her first strike. It wasn't an emotional outburst, but a precise, calculated, legal move. She called her father. "Dad, it's time." "Understood." Arthur Hayes replied briefly. An hour later, an unscheduled audit descended upon TransGlobal Logistics office. It wasn't the city tax office, but the internal security service of Arthur Hayes's main company. Several severe men in sharp suits walked into the office of CEO Victor Sterling and politely but insistently requested all financial documentation for the last 3 years. Victor was in shock. He called his father-in-law, but he didn't answer. He called Alana. "Alana, what is going on?" He yelled into the phone. "There are people here from your dad's company. They're demanding all the documents. They're talking about an audit." "Calm down, Vic," she answered in an icy tone. "It's a standard procedure. The parent company has the right to audit its subsidiaries. You're not hiding anything, are you? Everything is above board, right?" A silence hung in the air. Victor knew perfectly well that everything was not above board. Those loans, the corporate expenses he had spent on himself, all of it could surface. I'm coming home now. We need to talk," he stammered in a panic. "Don't bother." Alana cut him off. "I'm busy today. I have a meeting with my lawyer." "What lawyer?" "For a divorce." She hung up before he could finish the question. The second step was blocking all accounts. Alana went to the bank where she and Victor had a joint family account which received part of her salary and which her husband habitually used freely. She filed a request to close joint access and transferred all funds to her personal account opened at a different bank. Then she chemled all supplementary credit cards issued in her name that Victor also used. He found this out when he tried to pay for lunch at an expensive restaurant where he had gone, as was his habit to relieve stress. The card was declined, and so was the second one. He called the bank and they informed him that all operations had been suspended at the request of the primary account holder. Victor raced home enraged, red with fury and humiliation. "What are you doing?" he roared from the threshold. "You blocked all the cards." "I couldn't pay for lunch. I had to borrow money from the waiter." "Poor baby," Alana said without a trace of sympathy as she sat in the living room with a cup of tea. "You'll have to get used to living within your means. Your own means." "But what means do I have if you blocked everything?" "Exactly," she nodded. You don't have any means of your own. Welcome to the real world, Vic.
He
Stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, and looked at her with hatred. The mask of the loving husband had completely fallen away. Before her was a cornered, furious predator. You're going to regret this, he whispered.
No.
Alana shook her head. I regretted all those 10 years I allowed you and your mother to use me. Now, I'm going to act. Just then, Margaret Sterling called him. Her voice was shrill. Vic, I just got a notification from the real estate agency. My apartment, the one I'm renting out, has been listed for sale. What is happening? Alana smirked. This was the cherry on top. That morning she had contacted the realtor who handled her mother-in-law's rental, presenting herself as Margaret's authorized representative. She had all the necessary data. She asked them to urgently list the apartment for sale at a price below market value. She knew this would cause panic. Victor looked at his wife in horror. Was that you too? It was me, she confirmed. I just decided to help your mother. She'll probably need money for lawyers. From the looks of things, she'll need them soon. Victor and his mother had received the first hits. Their financial stability, based on her family's money, had collapsed in a single day. Their confidence in their own impunity was undermined. They were in shock. And this was only the beginning. Elena saw the fear and panic in their eyes and knew she had chosen the right tactic. Now they would start making mistakes and she would wait and record every one of them. Panic is a terrible strategist. Stripped of access to money and sensing a real threat to their well-being, Victor and Margaret Sterling began making one mistake after another. Their reaction was exactly what Alana expected. Chaotic, emotional, and completely predictable.
First, Victor tried to
regain control using strong-arm tactics. That evening, after the failed attempt at dialogue, he approached Alana. Again. This time his tone was menacing. Listen to me. He gritted through his teeth, grabbing her arm. You're going to unblock those cards and cancel this audit circus right now, or things will get worse. Worse than when you chased my mother away from the table? Alana asked calmly, looking him straight in the eye. Her composure only angered him.
More.
Don't you dare remind me of that. It was a mistake. I apologized.
You
didn't apologize. You said my mother was to blame. Let go of my arm, Vic. You're hurting me. I'll hurt you even more if you don't stop playing your games. He squeezed her arm tighter. Alana didn't scream or struggle. She simply took out her phone and activated the voice recorder, which was now always at hand. Please repeat what you just said.
Is
that a threat? Should I call the police? Victor recoiled as if from fire and released her arm. He realized she was ready to record every move he made. Direct threats no longer worked, so he and his mother moved to phase 2, leveraging pity and trying to make Alana look like a monster in the eyes of others. Margaret Sterling began calling their mutual acquaintances, the very high-status guests who had been at the birthday party. She sobbed into the phone, telling a heartbreaking story of how her ungrateful daughter-in-law had gone mad, how she, the poor widow, had dedicated her life to her son, and now this vicious woman was throwing them out onto the street, depriving them of their livelihood and falsely accusing them. She claimed Alana had always been secretive and envious, and now, apparently, she was having a nervous breakdown fueled by jealousy of her husband's success. Some acquaintances sympathized, others, more perceptive, viewed her stories with skepticism. But the goal was achieved. Rumors began to spread. People started talking about Alana, casting sideways glances at her. Victor, for his part, played the victim. At work, he complained to colleagues that his wife was going through a severe crisis, that she had become erratic, suspected him of cheating, and was trying to destroy their family. He asked for understanding and forgiveness, implying that the company audit was merely a consequence of her paranoia. But here, too, they miscalculated. Alana was prepared for this turn. She called Eleanor Jenkins, the city councilman's wife, the most influential of all their acquaintances. Alana didn't complain or justify herself. She simply said, "Eleanor, I know Margaret is spreading terrible things about me. I won't comment on her words. I just want you to know the full truth will soon be revealed, and it will be very unflattering for the Stirrings. I would advise you to hold off on public support for now." Her confident and calm tone made a much greater impression on the seasoned socialite than Margaret's hysterics. Ella Laner Jenkins understood that the matter was serious and chose to occupy a waiting position. The final escalation happened at the end of the week. The auditors finished their work. The results were shocking. They uncovered not only Victor's personal loans, which he paid from the corporate account, but also several fraudulent schemes involving shell companies through which he had siphoned money. The total amount stolen from the company over 3 years was not $150,000, but nearly $500,000. Arthur Hayes summoned his son-in-law for a meeting not at home but at his office downtown. Alana was also present. Victor walked into the office pale and haggard. He knew this was the end. "I can explain everything," he started, flustered. "It's a misunderstanding, an accounting error. There are no errors of $500,000. Arthur Hayes interrupted him. He placed the auditor's report in front of him. "Here, everything is detailed with account numbers and transaction dates." Victor stared at the documents, his face growing paler. I only wanted what was best, to grow the business." "You wanted to line your pockets," his father-in-law said harshly. "You stole from me the man who gave you everything." In that moment, Victor made his final biggest mistake. He decided to go Alan. "What was I supposed to do?" he suddenly shouted, leaping from his chair. "You never valued me. To you I was always just your daughter's husband. You bought me this position, this firm, like a toy. I wanted to prove that I was worth something on my own, and you proved it." Arthur Hayes nodded. "You proved you are a petty, ungrateful thief. No, you're the one to blame for everything." Victor railed. "Your overprotection turned me into a puppet. And you," he turned to Alana, "you were always on their side. You never truly loved me. You just enjoyed your power." He spewed all his bitterness, all his resentment, all his pettiness. He blamed them for all his sins, trying to shift the responsibility for his actions onto the shoulders of the people he had cheated and robbed. Alana and her father listened to the hysterics in silence. They didn't interrupt, didn't argue. They let him finish. When he finally fell silent, gasping for breath, Arthur Hayes calmly said, "You have two options, Victor. First, I hand all these materials over to the police. Fraud in a severe degree. That's up to 10 years in federal prison. Your mother, by the way, would go along as an accomplice. Some accounts were opened in her name. And the second," Victor rasped, "second, you sign a divorce settlement agreeing to waive all claims to marital assets. You leave my house with one suitcase. I, of course, take the firm back. And the $500,000 debt. You will repay it. You will work. And half of your salary will be withheld toward the repayment to the last dime." Victor collapsed into the chair. He was utterly crushed. "Choose," Arthur Hayes said. Panic and fury had trapped him in a corner. He had signed his own death warrant, and Alana knew which option he would choose, the option that would allow him to remain free. But that freedom would cost him everything he had. The choice for Victor was obvious. Between the prospect of prison and the loss of all material benefits, he chose the latter without hesitation. His arrogance and greed had evaporated, replaced by animalistic fear. "I agree," he whispered, not raising his eyes. "I thought you would." Arthur Hayes nodded. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Marina, please send in the lawyers." A minute later, 2 specialists from the company's legal department entered the office. Pre-prepared documents were already laid out on the table: the divorce agreement, the waiver of asset claims, and the debt restructuring contract with the company. Victor read the papers with trembling hands. Every clause was like a nail being hammered into the coffin of his former carefree life. He gave up everything, the house, the car, the share in the business, which he never truly had anyway. He acknowledged his debt of $500,000 and agreed to its repayment through monthly deductions from his future earnings. Sign it, Arthur Hayes said.
Victor took the pen.
His gaze flickered to Alana as if seeking a drop of sympathy in her eyes, but her face was impassive. She looked at him like a stranger, like an annoying obstacle that needed to be removed. He signed all the documents. And now, Alana said, speaking for the first time throughout the meeting, you will go home and pack your things. You have 2 hours. After that, I'm changing the locks. Where am I supposed to go? He asked, bewildered. That's no longer my concern, she replied. You can go to your mother's place. As we found out, she has a beautiful apartment that she's renting out. Perhaps she'll let you stay there. That same evening, Victor Sterling left the house where he had lived for 10 years. He left with one small suitcase, containing his personal belongings. Everything else, the expensive clothes, watches, and gadgets bought with stolen money, remained in the house. Alana said she would turn it all over toward the repayment of his debt. But the story did not end there. Alana knew that punishing Victor alone was only half the job. Margaret Sterling, the chief ideologue and manipulator, also had to get what she deserved. The next day, Alana went to her mother-in-law's place without warning. Margaret opened the door, thinking it was her son. Seeing Alana on the threshold, she tried to slam the door, but Alana managed to wedge her foot in the opening. We need to talk. Margaret, I have nothing to say to you, she hissed. You ruined my son's life. No, Alana calmly countered, walking into the apartment. Your son's life was ruined by your greed, your snobbery, and your manipulations. She placed her voice recorder on the table. I came to offer you a deal, much like the one I offered your son. Margaret looked at her with hatred. I have evidence of your involvement in Victor's fraudulent schemes. Some accounts were opened in your name. That's complicity. Furthermore, I have statements regarding your hidden real estate and income.
If I
pass this on to the IRS, you will have very big problems. Undeclared income. Tax evasion. The mother-in-law turned pale. What do you want? She asked.
I
want you to disappear from my life and the lives of my parents forever. You will write them a letter of apology, a sincere one, and never try to contact them again. If you refuse, I will not only hand the documents over to the IRS, but I will also tell all your high-status friends the entire truth about
you.
How you cheated, how you lived off others, pretending to be a poor widow.
I
don't think your elite circle is very fond of con artists. Your reputation, which you value so much, will be destroyed. Margaret remained silent. She was broken. Her main asset, her social status, was under threat. I will write it, she said quietly.
The
letter was written that same day, short, dry, full of formal phrases, but the apology was there. Alana took the letter and left without saying goodbye.
The
final act was complete. The antagonists were defeated. Victor had lost everything and was burdened with a huge debt. Margaret Sterling was humiliated and terrified. Justice, albeit severe, had prevailed. Alana returned to her empty house. She walked through the rooms where her family had lived just yesterday and felt neither joy nor relief, only bitterness and exhaustion. Yes, she had won, but the victory felt like a defeat. She had lost 10 years of her life, lost faith in love and family. She walked over to the phone and dialed her mother's number. Mom, please come over with Dad. I need to hug you.
The
conflict was over. The tension was gone. The worst was behind her. Ahead was a new unknown life that she had to build from scratch. 6 months passed. The divorce from Victor was finalized quickly and without complications. The agreement he had signed left him no recourse. He found work as an ordinary sales manager at a small firm with half his salary automatically going toward debt repayment. He lived with his mother in that same one-bedroom apartment she had once secretly rented out. Their world built on lies and other people's money had crumbled, leaving behind only the wreckage of broken dreams and bitter disappointment. Alana sold the massive suburban house. It was too big for her alone and held too many painful memories. With the money, she bought a spacious, bright loft apartment downtown with windows overlooking a quiet park. She personally handled the design, chose the furniture, creating a space that reflected her new self, strong, independent, and free. She did not return to her marketer position. Her father, seeing how much she had changed, how she had matured and been hardened by the fight, made a decision he had been considering for a long time. He made her his vice president and business partner. "You proved you have backbone, honey," he told her, signing the documents. "You are smarter and tougher than I thought. This company is your future. You can handle it." And she did. Alana threw herself into work, finding salvation and self-realization in it. She proved to be a talented leader, tough but fair. People respected her, and competitors feared her. The soft, compliant woman who was afraid to offend her husband and mother-in-law was a thing of the past. Her parents, Lydia and Arthur Hayes, visited her more often. They no longer felt awkward. In Elena's new apartment, there was no room for snobbery or pretense. They sat in her cozy kitchen, drank tea with homemade pie, and talked about simple yet important things. Looking at her mother's happy, peaceful face, Alana knew she had done the right thing. She had protected not only herself but also them, restoring their sense of self-worth. One day, while sorting through old things, she stumbled upon her wedding album. In the 10-year-old photos, she and Victor looked so happy. She stared for a long time at the smiling young man who had promised to love her forever and felt nothing but a slight sadness, not for him, but for the naive girl she once was. She wasn't looking for a new relationship. The pain of the betrayal hadn't fully faded, and the scars on her heart were still a reminder, but she was no longer afraid of loneliness. She had learned to value it, finding time in it for herself, for her thoughts, for her growth. One night, returning late from work, she saw Victor in the courtyard of her building. He stood in the rain without an umbrella, looking up at her lighted windows. He looked older, thinner. There was a look of longing in his eyes. He noticed her and stepped forward. "Alana," he began. "Go away, Vic," she said quietly but firmly, not stopping. "Nothing here belongs to you anymore." She walked into the building without looking back. She knew that the past needed to be left in the past. The internal victory was complete. She hadn't just punished her abusers. She had found herself. She understood that her strength was not in money or status, but in her ability to be honest with herself and others, to defend her boundaries, and to never let anyone humiliate her. That evening, sitting in her new comfortable armchair, with a book in her hands, she looked out at the lights of the city and thought about the future. It no longer seemed frightening or lonely. It was full of possibilities, and she was ready for it, ready to build her life by her own rules, where the most important things were not the right people, but genuine feelings, love, respect, and dignity. And she knew she would never allow anyone to take that from her again. "I'm really glad you're here and that I could share my story with you. If you liked it, show me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel. Let's see how many of us there are. Write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is. I'm so curious to know where all you wonderful people are tuning in from. If you want to support me a little extra, you can also send a small donation. I share new life stories for you every single day. And now 2 of my most popular stories will pop up on the screen so you can choose what to watch.